start with, thank you for the recording in progress. We always start with a prayer, and the person who has done the prayer for us this morning is Zabada January, but she was not able to join us in person, so she sent us a recording. But before we do that, I'd like to ask you to please just introduce yourself in the chat. Say who you are and where you're from. We'd really like to know that. And then also, obviously, just to remember that we are recording this session. And a particular welcome to our speakers, whom I will introduce shortly. But here is the prayer, meanwhile, from Zabada. Wait, sorry, just a little bit of a glitch. And
to its resources. We have a diverse Kai says, Goeiemorgen, good morning, Molweni, Sawubona, Assalamu alaikum, Shalom everybody. My name is Zabada January and I am a Khoi Aboriginal woman. I feel honored to do the welcome to land on behalf of my ancestors. I have the privilege of being born from a Khoi bloodline and on the soil of my forefathers. I also have the privilege of receiving my traditional history from my father from a very young age. This is Khoi traditional land. My people have a very unique and spiritual connection to this land and to its resources. We have a diverse heritage which consists of various tribes, each with their own characteristics, but we are all Khoi and we all connected by blood to the land that we have the privilege of living on today. Africa is a sacred space. Many centuries ago, this was the home to my ancestors. My ancestors respected the soil as much as the stars, the mountains, the waters, the winds, and every living organism of this land and within. The sacredness of this land transcends to a higher power, a power bigger than man. This land that we are living on today was their gift from humanity. My ancestors were true believers of preserving the gifts of God. They lived symbiotically with the utmost respect for the earth. I honor and I respect the diversity that's on our land today. So no matter your culture, your religion, your spirituality, your gender orientation, your identity, we are all connected to the sacred soil of the Khoi, the true and original custodians of the land on which we have the privilege of living on today. I can sense that the spirit of my ancestors are at peace as I am proclaiming to you that we are standing on Khoi traditional land. May the Almighty, through the spirit of my ancestors, bless, fulfill, and protect you as you navigate your way through this land. In honor of my ancestors, I have a favor to ask you. Please receive the blessings that the Southern Hemisphere has to offer you. Please be kind to one another. Be kind to the soil. Be kind to the water, Be kind to the plants. Be kind to every living creature. Let us heal together. Let us be empathetic to each other. Let's be compassionate. Let's collaborate together. Appreciate the diversity and create unity wherever we go. Let's do this for our past, our present, and our emerging generations. Kangans. Thank you, Inkoy.
Thank you to Zabada January for that beautiful opening blessing. And now it is for me to introduce to you our guest speakers for the day. So, as you know, we've entered Women's Month. We celebrate on the 9th of August, we celebrate Women's Day in South Africa. And so it seemed only right to have a full panel of women speakers to really give voice to the women who nurture, acknowledge, who grow things, who just hold the space for who we are and what we do on our planet today. There is a quote in one recent paper that said that women hold the key to solving the climate crisis. And that's a really big quote, and I think we're going to hear a little bit more about that today. So first of all, I'd like to introduce to you Dr. Jessica Thorn, who hails originally from Cape Town, from the progressive Jewish community. Dr. Thorn is a social ecological system scientist with a background in ecology and human geography. She is a lecturer of sustainable development at the School of Geography and Sustainable Development at the University of St. Andrews and the University of Namibia. She originally comes from Namibia and has 15 years of experience working on various funded projects affiliated to the UN, World Bank, governments, and various NGOs. Her work broadly concentrates on climate change adaptation, biodiversity adaptation, conservation, the sustainability of mega infrastructure, and green transitions in peri-urban, smallholder, and mountain systems. Her list of academic achievements is long and impressive, but I do want to tell you that originally she studied at UCT, Oxford, and Colorado State University, as well as the University of York and ETH Zurich, but also, and importantly for our purposes, Dr. Jessica Thorn held an African Women in Climate Change Fellowship at the African Climate and Development Initiative. So I'm really looking forward to hearing what Dr. Thorn is going to be telling us about today. And her subject will be exploring Indigenous cosmovisionaries and environmental justice as an African woman in climate change science. So I'm sure that we're going to really look forward to that, Jessica. Thank you. I think that before we give you the stage, though, I am going to just quickly let you know who the other speakers are in our lineup today. Jessica will be followed by Makoma Lekalakala, who from Earth Life Africa, who will be speaking to us about breaking barriers of patriarchy in the context of Earth Care, with particular reference to the nuclear situation and from the perspective of the African traditional religion. And Makoma, as a director of Earth Life Africa in Johannesburg, is an environmental justice and anti-nuclear activist. She is a strong campaigner for a just and fair society, and her commitment to climate justice in South Africa has led civil society to win the first South African climate change legal court case against the government and the reversal of the nuclear deal by the South African and the Russian government. And that is where SAFCEI's connection with Makoma comes in, because we were intimately involved in that court case. And for her efforts, Makoma received the WWF Living Awards Honorable Mention in 2017, the Goldman Environmental Prize for Africa in 2018, and the Nick Steele Environmentalist of the Year for 2018. And those are just some of the accolades she has received. Makoma was recently appointed to the Presidential Climate Commission, a body which is tasked with advising the President of South Africa on the process of a just transition to a low carbon development. We like to think that that's why President Ramaphosa has recently been saying a lot of good things about renewables, and we hope that that comes to fruition. And then later on, we'll be hearing from SAFCEI's Executive Director, that is Francesca Gasparis, and Francesca also has a long history in conservationism. She worked for many years with Wangari Maathai, who was the first Nobel Peace Prize winner in Africa, or woman Nobel Peace Prize winner in Africa, sorry, had to get that right. And yeah, so we are really fortunate to have an amazing lineup today. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for being here. And Jessica, the floor is yours. I will make you a co-host, as I believe that you need to share something. And there you. Actually, I'm going to ask my colleague Tam to make you co-host. And in the meantime, just to thank my colleagues, Tamsin and Patiswa, particularly for all their assistance in putting this regional interfaith dialogue together. Jessica, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Okay, sorry about that glitch. Good morning, everybody, and it's lovely to be here. Thank you very much to SAFCEI for the invitation. I'm very excited to be have this opportunity for the next few minutes to explore some of the work I've been doing around local indigenous cosmo-visionaries and environmental justice, as mentioned, as an African woman in climate change science. So I'll give another go to try and share my screen, and hopefully you can see the full screen now. So what I'd like to talk to you a little bit is about how we look at global initiatives of the future, looking at indigenous knowledge across Africa, and thinking about how, as female scientists and people of faith and other indigenous holders of knowledge, we can collaborate around issues of climate change adaptation and mitigation. So in my own work, I examine these issues through three lenses, as Barry mentioned: mega infrastructure and land use transformations, peri-urban ecologies, and synergistic climate change mitigation and conservation. Most of this work has been situated in Southern and Eastern Africa, with some work in Asia and South America. And I employ tools such as scenario analysis, ecosystem service quantification, spatial analysis, and trend analysis. And to do this, I try and aim to work with science and society, aligning to the Sustainable Development Goals. So it's widely acknowledged that among those most affected by climate change are those in Africa, owing to the deprivation of access to service infrastructure, poverty, and marginalization. And globally, every year, people are displaced by climate disasters. About 3% of greenhouse gas emissions come from Africa, 1.5%, which mostly come from Egypt and South Africa, with the remaining 1.5% attributed to the rest of the continent, while the richest 10% worldwide contribute to half of the emissions in the atmosphere. So clearly, this is an issue of environmental justice. Similarly, ecosystem restoration of Africa is a challenge for the entire global community, and not only the burden of our communities, who bear the natural and labor resource extraction that has benefited nations outside of the continent for many generations. And as rapid urbanization grows, the lines between rural and urban blur, and approximately 70% still live in informal settlements on the periphery of cities, exposed to hazards as floods and landslides. And they're often excluded from decision-making processes and have limited access to green spaces. So all of these issues of adaptation, mitigation, loss and damage, and the just transition indeed are challenges of humanity. And compounding this, Africa's biodiversity is a strategic asset, with 62% of the population living in rural areas, depending on these key ecosystem services, as shown on the left-hand side. But concurrently, according to the International Panel on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services, many of these species still are on the IUCN Red List are declining. And compounding this, as we all know, as an author of the IPCC chapter, Africa chapter in the last report, we've shown that we've seen yearly yields in livestock and agriculture and aquaculture, heat stress and damage to mental health. And this climate change interacts with biodiversity loss, seeing between 14 and 48% of species facing extinction, with impacts on national GDPs. So not only are these impacts important for local populations, but scientists have reached a consensus globally through many modeling approaches that we're seeing that these models correlate with local perspectives. So how does my spirituality shape my work as a female climate scientist? This convergence of pollution, climate change, and climate matter is a matter of spirituality. Because as the Archbishop of Sweden says, without love and hope and putting human rights and nature first, and not bureaucratic and processes, political interests, we will certainly fail to address this climate crisis. Religion can be used as a way to mobilize humanity to not only address the crisis because it appeals to norms and values, but by linking experience to social action and expressing itself through myth, symbolism, and narrative, which are the deepest forms of human expression. Historically, some have argued that science and history are inseparable because of its utopian aspirations. And more recently, moral considerability to non-human system has led to the emergence of actors of strands of environmental thought, such as environmental justice, deep ecology, and ecofeminism, as well as socio-ecological systems, which problematize the boundary between nature and society. So as an African woman in climate science, my Jewish experience has certainly been shaped by my environmentalism, which in turn shapes it in 6 key ways, which I'll now go into. First is the idea of stewardship and indigenous cosmovisionaries. In the last 50 years, many religions have called for the idea that we are stewards of the land. This stems from the idea that we don't have dominion over the land, but we have a responsibility to it. And across many parts of Africa, Asia, and elsewhere, indigenous knowledge is used in the everyday life of communities, especially, for instance, where there's rain-fed agriculture or where there's strong relationship to the land for sustainable livelihoods. So for instance, for our work, we've worked at a continental level, but also at a local empirical level, and found in our work in the small island states of Zanzibar, or in northern Namibia, or in the mountains of Tanzania, ways in which people read the movement of species to look at changing rainfall patterns, or are you assessing ethnobotanical uses of medicinal plants. For instance, in Mount Kilimanjaro in Tanzania, farmers are shifting from coffee crops to avocado to adapt to changing temperatures. And similarly, they're changing crop varieties or storing food for drought. And in the Zunga Mountains, we found women have differential access to early warning systems and have responsibility in different kinds of responsibility in harvesting ecosystem services, for instance, like firewood. But at the same time, we're also seeing substantive cultural assimilation and loss of an indigenous knowledge. The second key area is the ethics of responsibility. People from all faiths of this world are called to take on responsibility for creation. And a core principal tenet of Judaism is that of tikkun olam, loving kindness. We need to look towards future generations, ensuring equitable access and benefits of resources, as outlined by the Nagoya Protocol. In my own work, capacity, both in research, capacity building of national governments, and in teaching, we look towards strength-based approaches, looking towards hope to catalyze change, rather than vulnerability. We collect stories of autonomous adaptation. And as humans, we tend to ignore the fact that the world we live in is one amongst many possible worlds. And that's made possible because we thought that others were unfeasible. Third is in the era of climate change, changes are needed in all sectors of society, and in particular in the area of gender inequality. As an African woman in STEM, I continue to observe the leaky pipeline. a persistent gender pay gap, and leaders in science continuing to be held by male figures. According to the UNDP, moreover, the risk to die from a disaster is 14 times higher than that of a woman or girl than that of a man. And some ways that we try and tackle this is through, for instance, running Pan-African conferences where we talk about the importance of gender equity, by promoting scholarships for graduate MSc and PhD women, female scientists, and through mentorship programs. There is indeed an urgent need to implement the enhanced Lima work program on gender and its gender action plan, and create more gender responsive climate finance. And we need a better understanding of the gendered use of resources and issues around control of land tenure. A core part of my work is to also connect the past, present, and future, as many religions do. We use future-making tools and strategic foresight to understand how the power of prophecies influences decision-making in the future, and how imagination influences decision-making in the present. One of the tools we employ is called kesho, which means tomorrow in Swahili, which offers an opportunity for collaboration and cooperation, examining not only system interconnections, but also trade-offs across sectoral domains of different trajectories. Participatory scenarios planning helps us to identify transformative pathways to bring resilience to global environmental change. The power of the tool is that it brings together policymakers, practitioners, businesses, and civil society, building on a shared understanding of a system and its overcoming sectoral silos. And we've now employed this tool in places such as Tanzania, Kenya, Namibia, Ghana, Nepal, the US, and elsewhere. And I hope to bring another key element about this is moving away from this idea of blue skies research, but scaling a more transdisciplinary approach, using a science for society approach, which brings together different types of actors through knowledge co-production and appreciates diversity in cultural values. We also use this to assess the viability of certain scientific recommendations, trying to understand that each strategy should be evaluated by context. We found by working with collaborators, for instance, in this brief I'm showing you here, we worked with the United Nations Environmental Program, that we can counter narratives of hate and fear with trust and vision. And this attempt was in the area of where I coordinated a report for the Global Environmental Outlook, looking at how business can future-proof infrastructure, use driving innovation in green infrastructure. Fourth is the need to challenge our own traditions. Climate change demands that scientific rigor and contextual applicability, as does religion. And there still remains a significant gap between scientific understanding and political willingness to act, and use the science as the foundation for decision-making. So here we start to look at questions of balancing conservation and development agendas. For instance, in the figure on the right-hand side is a storyboard of how we developed an animation of how we could envision future restorations in peri-urban or informal settlements in the future. And we're continuing to expand this work in Madagascar and Sierra Leone. Fifth is a respect for diversity. Judaism consists of not only the Torah and the mitzvot, but also diverse cultures and languages and geographies, stretching from a history of almost 30 centuries. In my own family, I have a Buddhist sister, a Catholic brother, agnostic father, and a community of diverse friends, from Baha'is to Jains to Hindus. I draw from my own family experience, some coming from a Jewish history of grandparents who fled Lithuania during the Holocaust, and continuing to live in a diaspora of a very small population, but also some coming from the Cape Malay tradition who stem from a history of marginalization in South Africa, amongst others. So similarly, environmentalism signifies this return to links to other traditions. So it requires a broader understanding of community. And I try to impart this with my working with students, thinking about issues of environmental justice and equality, and how we can scale innovative approaches to access to service delivery. For instance, in informal settlements in Windhoek and Dar es Salaam, in Freetown, in Jaffna, in Beijing, and Antananarivo. And finally, sixth is the connection to values. Many objections of climate change have nothing to do with the science, but have everything to do with ideology and identity. Key to having a real discussion is to connect over shared values like family, community, and religion, to prompt people to realize that what they already care about is important to a changing climate. Social scientists have shown that if people have built their identity about rejecting a certain fact, then arguing about it is a personal attack. It digs a trench rather than building a bridge. So we need to start from the heart of what values are important to us. Do we live in the same community? Are we both parents? Do we care about the economy or national security? Given the fact that climate change is a threat multiplier, we need to link it to issues of poverty, hunger, or the refugee crisis. Fear is not going to motivate us to act. We need to talk about practical, viable, and accessible solutions. So my bring home messages are, my spirituality shapes my work as an African woman in climate change science because it prompts discussions about the stewardship to land and indigenous cosmo-visionaries. It drives us to think about the ethics of responsibility. It calls us to accept continuous change, challenge our own traditions, and respect diversity, and connect to what values are important to us. So I'll leave it there, and I thank you for your attention.
Jessica, thank you so much. That was really amazing. And I am so glad that you particularly also touched on the gender responsive issue to climate finance, because I read somewhere that a woman in Africa, 1 unit of currency, 1 rand, would actually be equivalent to about 11 rand in the hands of a man. And I found that a fascinating statistic, because I just thought, isn't that exactly how we are as women? We really have learned how to make the most of what we have, and we really use our resources to look after our families and our future. So thank you so much for a really wonderful, wonderful presentation. I'm so thrilled that you were able to make this time to be with us, and I know you have a very busy schedule. So every blessing to you, and thank you so much. There might be some questions for you later. We'll be going to a breakout room shortly after Makoma has spoken in response to your presentation. And in those breakout rooms, we'll be asking questions about how we encourage, support, and recognize women of our faiths as they care for the earth, and also about how our faiths respond to women in environmental leadership. And just one question for you, Jessica, before we go on to Makoma, is, do you always feel valued as a woman in climate science?
Thanks, Barry. That's quite a question. I would say that we currently live in a time where I'm quite fortunate to be a woman in the position I'm in. I think I have a lot of privilege compared to most women in the world. And I think in the field in which we operate, there are increasingly opportunities for women, especially African women in science, and there's a massive gap that needs to be filled. So there are many opportunities. So I often feel very valued. I think there are often subtle nuances in the way that we operate professionally that I think that we probably all experience on a daily basis, such as what kind of default tasks might be assigned to you, or the way in which you've been socialized to speak up in certain contexts, or especially, and I think it really varies according to society, depending on the extent of hierarchy and history and cultural context. So I think it really, I think it also requires special understanding of where you're operating, in which the diversity of contexts across the continent. But in general, the answer would be yes.
That's great to know. Very encouraging for the rest of us and well, for everybody, for all the women. Thank you so much, Jessica. Don't go away. We are going to cross over to Makoma Lekalakala, who is no stranger to SAFCEI. I did share with you a little bit of her background earlier, as when I introduced Jessica. I also introduced Makoma. And welcome home, Makoma. Welcome back to the SAFCEI stage.
Tabela, Jimelang. Good morning, everyone. I think I'm really privileged, particularly to speak after Dr. Jessica. I'm not sure if there's anything that I have to touch on, particularly with that kind of detailed sharing that you've done. But however, add some of the stuff that I think really speaks. I think there's a lot of commonalities from what you had presented with what most religions, no matter how different they are, but at the end, there's only one goal of protecting nature, because we are nature, and without us or without nature, we would not be there. And I'm very glad that some of the points that you brought are the kinds of points that also makes us think and also that incite us to take action. Reverend Brady, I would like to have sharing rights. Okay, I can share the screen. I've got that. Let me see. I don't know what I've done here. Okay. Thank you very much. I hope that my screen is, can you see it?
Yes, we can, Makoma. Thank you.
Okay, I think it's not in a presentation mode, but I'll continue with this. I think one thing that as Africans, our belief systems have been gradually being removed, or gradually being not being respected as something. They have been termed as being barbaric. They've been termed that it's not how people should live, but our spirituality has been there. And because this is part of a Women's Month series, I would want to say that for today, that there's so many people, particularly in Africa, that are going back to their spirituality, that are going back to their African religious belief system. It is true that there has been people who have been resisting the colonial imposition of other religions, and at the forefront of that, it was women. And these women were not actually termed as people who are fighting for the dignity, who are fighting for the preservation and also for the continuation of who we are, protecting the territories that people lived in. These women were termed as warriors, and warriors would mean, I mean, in any term, people would think that a warrior is somebody who really likes going to war, but they had no option but to fight colonialists so that they can maintain their territories, they can maintain who they are, they can maintain their cultures and their being. And amongst those people that, or those women that their names somehow removed from history, we have people like, I think here in South Africa, we can name people like Mantatisi from Shweshwe, or who's from Lesotho, who was one such warrior. We had Queen Mujaji also, who fought the colonialists and who was such warrior. And these women at the end were named, or were called sorcerers, were called witches. Those are negative connotations. And they were called that because they had that spirituality, they had that presence, they had that might and power of being able to relay the message and tell their people that they should not stop their practices, they should continue with them, and such they were termed as very bad people. We also don't hear much about Queen Zinga from Angola, who also had such leadership qualities, who had such power. We don't hear much about Amina from Nigeria, who also had those powers. These are the women leaders in Africa who fought colonialism to preserve and protect our religious practices. But today, when people refer to them, they don't refer to them in a positive light, they refer to them very negatively. These are our ancestors, these are our spiritual guides on an everyday basis. What they were fighting for, or what they wanted to preserve, is much more of what we today talk about, what Dr. Tsika had indicated around the adaptation as to what is that is needed now. And this adaptation that today is being revered. It's adaptation that from the learning of the indigenous knowledge systems, and this is much more needed information, and I can attest to that in that there's a lot of professors, doctors who come to us and the partners that we work with on the ground to say, what do you do to ensure that there is no erosion of the soil in this area? How do you make sure that these trees are protected? And a whole lot of questions. This picture that you see, it's a picture that has been taken in a village in Maramande in the Vemba region in Limpopo. That Maramande is one of the areas that are next to a proposed special economic zone. And the people in this area that we interacting with or we partnering with as Life Africa, these are the people that their cultures, their traditions are embedded in nature around their area. A baobab is a sacred tree to them, a marula tree, a mopari tree. These are the trees that they get food from. These are the trees that are embedded within their life systems. But then in the African religious belief system, the community is very important. That is part of everyone's life. That's why you see the community, whether they want to intercede, whether they, when they intercede, when they with the ancestors, or when they pray, they are always outside in a natural space, so that that connection is kept, that connection is there. What the African religious belief system, the glue to that is Ubuntu, a center of security and order in a community. You are Omutu, Kamutu, Emingapa. You are because I am. That is Ubuntu. That shows that we are all equal. That shows that we have to do things together in a community. That would mean that we practice and we look after each other and we look for each other. So that's what glues the African belief system. The other second layer of the glue is around umoja, togetherness. In a community, we do things together, we are together, and being together means we are one, and being one, that means you are connected by the spirit, we also are connected by our ancestors. The other glue of the African belief system is learning from the past. What are we getting from our forefathers? What have our ancestors left before for us? What is that? It's kind of intergenerational knowledge from one generation to the other that brings people together. And also the practices that are done are also relating to what we learned from the past. And this is what is called Sankofa, that is learning from the past to build the future. In all this, at the center, it's women. And women are the center because women give birth, women give life. And in the belief system, it's very rare that a woman is called in a singular form. It's mostly plural because it's her and the future, and the past and the future. And the belief system is also centered around, it's also centered around what, it's centered around respect. It's also centered around giving and also belonging. You hear most of the time when the moon or the sighting of the new moon, it's a rebirth. It's a renewal. It's giving life. So the sighting of a new moon is a very important occasion in the African belief system, and that's when most of the rituals are being performed. And women are always called we moon because these are the people who give birth. These are the people who actually make life happen. They are the custodians of our history. They are the ones who bring the intergenerational knowledge together. And that intergenerational knowledge that is being brought together by women, it's the intergenerational knowledge that teaches us to take care of nature, that teaches us to take care of what is around us, and what is around us also doesn't only mean the other people. It means the plants, it means the animals, it means every natural thing around you. And in other areas, I think people know that in most of the areas where the religion is practiced, or even not when the religion is practiced, because this is something in us that you have been taught, that you cannot fell a tree when a tree is green, when a tree is still giving fruit. You can only fell a tree when it's like really, really dry. You cannot pollute your river, you cannot pollute your stream. And this is the intergenerational knowledge that we have. So we become custodians of the natural inhabitant around us. What also it's important is that the protection of the sacred sites that we have, and our sacred sites are linked to nature. Most of the sacred sites are either streams, are either rivers, mountains, trees, and plants. And these sacred sites, the keepers of the sacred sites are women. And that's because the role that women play of that intergenerational knowledge, and that of custodians and carriers of nature, and also that they're the ones who are giving birth, and they're the ones that ensure that our heritage, it's not destroyed, our cultures and traditions continue. And we say that that is what brings us together. But then there's also a new generation of women, a generation of women that may have different belief systems, but this is a generation of women that were born of the African women in this continent. I have Mampataleni Makaulele, who's a gatekeeper of the sacred sites. She's in the Vembe region of Limpopo. This is where she's keeping the sacred sites alive. She's also a traditional healer, and she ensures that she also has got that intergenerational place where she ensures that sacred sites, that is a protection of biodiversity, it's kept alive by everyone around them. And then we have Spongile Mtoma here from KZN, who also plays a very important role of educating young women through various forms to take care of themselves, but more to take care of the environment around them. We have Promise Mabilo here, who's from Mpumalanga, who is Promise Mabule, who actually has taken the government to court over the air quality in the Mpumalanga area, where no one is able to breathe. So that's the role that the new generation of women are playing. We have Makoma, who is from Amadiba, who's protecting their land, their territories, and the biodiversity of the area, so that it's not destroyed by extractive industries, it's not destroyed by companies that would want to profit from there. We have other women here. We have Dora Marema, who is known to have pioneered part of the permaculture, part of eco-freedom amongst young women, so that people can live off the land. We've got Tuli Makoma here from Swaziland, who's done sterling work in Swaziland, ensuring the biodiversity of the area there. We've got Dr. Mela Kiponda from Zimbabwe, who also is working around people in Zimbabwe, particularly those that are threatened by extractives, to save their biodiversity. In Botswana, we've got Tracy Soni, who also works with communities, rural communities, the Sun. And she's also been part of the campaign against Recon Africa in Botswana, where other people are working in Namibia. And then we have Lekalakala, who is a protector, a keeper of the rivers. She's based in Turkana, in Kenya, and those are Lekalakala and Makaulele. These are the keepers of the sacred sites, the keepers of the rivers, the mountains, the keepers of our sacred sites. And this is something that is continued, though people don't see that as a spiritual act, as a religious act, but anyhow, they're doing that for the survival of the communities. And then we have Thorn here, very young, she's based in Cape Town, doing sterling work, and bringing young women into protecting their environment, and also educating others to learn as to how you can turn waste into wealth, and how you can also be able, part of the bigger issues as a young person. These are the young people that are saying, don't spoil now because we have a future. We have here Phyllis Omodo, who has also taken the Kenyan government and other corporations to court over mercury, over toxic chemicals in their area that has resulted in the death. So this is a new generation of African leaders. This is the new generation of people who are taking environmental issues to another level and making that fashionable, because it has not been fashionable. And people like Makaulele, Mtungwa, and Carl, making sure that spirituality, no matter whether it's linked with other religion, it remains there. The biodiversity of the people is corrected. This is part of a ritual that is being done. This was a ritual done in Makado, which is known as also as Louis Trichardt. This was when people were doing an eco-mapping of their area and not doing the environmental impact assessment, using the intergenerational knowledge of what their area is like and how they would want to see their areas being like. And so these are some of the examples of what really happens. But at the end of the day, what's very important is the unity. This was done at the end of this eco-mapping process. The previous slides that I've shown you, where people were saying, yes, we are together, yes, we do this together, yes, we love what we're doing, this is love, this is unity, that we're going to continue. And just saying these kind of things, much of the work that people do, much of the work that we do, it's driven by something that you don't know. If you really want to, if sometimes you're not even concerned about something, but there's that thing that pushes you, which you believe that is the spirit of our ancestors that is driving us. If you get into a campaign, I'll make an example about the nuclear campaign. When we took the government to court, it was just a kind of, this has got to be done. amidst all the threats, all the adversity, amidst all what was negatively said, what was pushing us, I don't know what really was pushing us, but the thing is that we have clarity of purpose and we're brave enough, and we said, this we're gonna do to protect our biodiversity. This is what we're gonna do to protect our rivers. This is what we're gonna do to protect the fauna and flora of areas in Dainfontein where it was an identified site, and that fauna and flora, it's a very unique fauna and flora. This is the fauna and flora where people in that area rely on for food, rely on for medicinal use, rely on for spiritual for spiritual and cultural events when they appease their ancestors, and that is done in a very responsible way. So the work that is being done, it's not the work because we are against particular a project. This is the work that has been influenced by those warriors or people that were called warriors that had fought colonialism, that had fought extractivism in a different form, because the context then and now is quite different. And this is what is pushing us, their spirit, their memory, and also that we find ourselves in a context that it's different. However, what I love is that there's more of African women leaders that are coming up and confronting the injustices, because confronting those injustices is preserving our dignity, and also it's a way that our ancestors are using us. And that's why at times when we do work, we say we are our ancestors' wildest dreams. Thank you.
My goodness, Makoma, you're amazing. Thank you so, so much. Yeah, that was, I feel that I have really been educated now, and I am so thrilled to meet all through you, all these wonderful women of Africa who are truly the warriors of today, as you said. I always learn so much from you, so thank you so much. I'm actually feeling quite, I feel quite emotional actually from your talk. So yeah, women give life, and we really do appreciate your talk. Thank you so much. We are going to move to breakout rooms now, but before we do, I just want to tell you about 2 questions that are going to come up in those breakout rooms. The first one is, how do we encourage, support, and recognize women of our faiths as they care for the earth? And it's in the chat now. Thank you to my wonderful colleagues. And the second question is, how do our faiths respond to women in environmental leadership? So we've seen some amazing examples of women in environmental leadership today. And I do appreciate your comment, Edward, in the chat a little earlier, as Makoma was speaking, to say that today's presentations really demonstrate that women are indeed equal, if not more than equal, to men, and that we really need to take note of the leadership right here. I also want to make a little bit of an announcement to those of you who might still be waiting for data for today, and that is to say that data will be available for refund, because we've had a bit of a technical glitch, and I've had confirmation from our accountant that we will be able to refund data to those who RSVP'd for the event and specifically requested data at the RSVP time. But our technical glitches have caused us to not be able to do what we had hoped. So just to let you know that we will be refunding data to those who requested. Right, here we go into our breakout rooms. And thank you so much again to our colleagues for organizing that. I can't wait to see what you bring back. Are we
Okay. Hello.
Hi, Tabili. I see you there. Hi, everybody, and welcome back from those very interesting conversations. I'm not sure about you, but I don't think we had enough time to really get through all of the points that we wanted to make and what we wanted to express. But what we did have was really, really interesting. I would like to know if anybody would, I'd like some feedback. How did you find that? It just raise, I see Francesca's hand is raised. Francesca, I think. Oh no, it's not Francesca's hand. Sorry, Francesca, that was my own cursor turned into a hand for some reason over your name. Who would like to give some comment about aha moments or anything that you found in or learned in the breakout rooms? And if I don't see a hand, I might have to just volunteer you, but I'll just share while you're thinking about it. I see Lydia, I see your hand and I'll come to you right now, but I just want to finish the sentence I just started, and that is that in our breakout room, it was all the answers were ease. It was about encouragement. But encouragement is really powerful when you encourage people by showing them what to do or giving them, suggesting things in a way that enables them to really move forward. Empowering people with ideas and training, obviously, and engaging people, but also education was a huge thing. And also really engaging people where they are. So if you're in the home, if you're a woman in the home, engaging women with training around how to maximize your use, for instance, of energy and water. So, so those were some really great pointers. Lydia, the floor is yours.
Good morning, Reverend.
Good morning.
Do I have to put on my camera?
Not if you really don't want to. We don't force you.
Okay, all right. Let me rather do that. Reverend, I was in the most amazing room. I had Zalda from Cape Town, Vincent I couldn't quite get, and I had Noluthando from the Eastern Cape, and I had Halumba from Zambia, I think. And the questions that was in the chat, it garnered quite a few responses. And as you rightfully says, it is about encourage the support for women. And we have quite a few answers and comments about that. Halumba says that the systems and the cultures, the policies within our communities and within even our safer places, which is our worship places, we can advocate for change. And that is mostly to support our women and our sisters in faith. And also it is to support women in environmental leadership by addressing these policies and forthwith be the change that we know that we are. And I'll come back to the one that he blindsided me with. And Noluthando says that it is also to change the mindsets, because we are talking about the hierarchy, we're talking about patriarchy here. So where we find ourselves, and Zalda also attested to this, is that my sister also said, and we had the same vibe going here when we said that ever since I'm with SAFCEI as a faith leader, I find myself being in the spaces which are intended for me within us, in our ministries, whereas we can address certain policies, whereas environmental issues, how we as faith leaders, as women, find our space in church where we can be outspoken, and therefore we sort of unify the congregation and we unify our ministry. And then we were blindsided by the only male in our group, which is Halumba. He says, the women on this group, do you think you are strong enough to kind of occupy the spaces? And, or should you be trained to be there. And all the women responded and said, we are strong enough to occupy those spaces, and we should not be trained because we are inherently strong, we are powerful, and we are resilient. And that is the basis of our presentation this morning. Thank you, Reverend.
Thank you, Lydia. Beautifully presented, and yeah, beautifully represented. Thank you so much. Which breakout room were you?
And number 4.
You were number 4.
Yes,
Thank you
Reverend.
so much. Really appreciate
Thank
that.
you to the group that was with me. It was nice meeting them. And there is a visit from a certain gentleman who will be coming to Cape Town, I heard. And it was lovely speaking to them. Thank you from my part.
Awesome. Well
Thank
done, Lydia. Thank you. Patiswa, did I see your hand up? Maybe not. Maybe it was another optical illusion.
No, sorry, Reverend. I was just clapping for Lydia's feedback.
Ah, okay. So I did see a hand, but it was a clapping hand. You're welcome.
Yes.
It was brilliant feedback. Thank you so much. Who was in group 1? I'd really like to hear from group 1. Anybody? Okay, how about group 2?
Okay,
Yeah.
I'll just summarize what group 1 discussed on both questions in a point form. What we recognize is that the contexts are different, either in different faiths or either at different locations. But what came out is that in one context, there is an issue around equality within the faith that the person who was sharing comes from, that most of the people who are in that faith space are really very old people, and the leadership is also of old people. So that means there's a need of some shaking up and changing, because in that setup, women are still being seen as submissive. So there's a need for a mindset and also a need to discuss much more around equality. Since women have got a spirit of caring, they need to be encouraged to take leadership positions in all faiths. What also came out was that what would be important would be to share stories of local heroes, of what women are doing at particular places. And this stories needs to be amplified internationally, because there's not much that is known about the work that women do in protecting the environment. And this is seen, it will be realized if there could be a dedicated profiling of women's work and documentation of this work, so that other people can know about, and that in this different context areas in faith, that gender equality should be the norm in how the faith is being practiced. And what is also being recognized is that women take care of everything. They're managers in the home, they're managers in the community, they're managers in the locality, they're the ones who are carers. So they should be given that specific space, and they should be regarded as the people that keep communities or whatever interest groups that people have in that particular community. Thank you very much. I hope I had tried to summarize.
Thank you so much. I think that was Makoma speaking. Am I correct?
Yes, it is.
Okay, great. It's just that your name tag on your little box is Berry Byrne. I'm very sure that I'm here. So I was just a bit confused for a moment. But thank you so much, Makoma. That was really, really interesting. And yeah, gender equity should be the norm everywhere. But also, I love the idea of amplifying the stories internationally. That sounds like a project, a dream project for somebody. Amazing. Thank you so much. That was group 1. Group 2 is the group that is left. Group 2, Who is going to represent group 2 and give us your insights? Who was in group 2?
I was also in group 2.
Ah, Tabile, would you like to please share the insights from group 2?
Okay, it was to encourage support for question 1
Yeah.
for women of our faith, as they are caregivers and they care for the earth. Educate them to drive themselves further by preserving their products. Give them space to work on, organize campaigns led by women, and support them. Let's say, for instance, they are doing agriculture. We purchase their produce. And the second question, we couldn't finish. I'll just say part of mine, and then I think the others will add. We need to say our stories in video forms to even break the barrier, the language barriers, involve the church, youth, so that there is continuation of the works of women, because somewhere, somehow, the link gets lost. Like the other person spoke about 2 elderly people, so we need to mix the generations. And our religion encourages us to give to the needy, like the produce, part of it you can give to the needy, so that you encourage them, even the info, even the space, and yeah, care for them, give them love. That's from me, the second question only. The others can add, please.
Tabile, thank you so much. Those are really beautiful, wonderful thoughts full of compassion and creating the kind of world that we all want to see. Is there anybody else from group 2 who would like to add to Tabile's thoughts? Okay, I have a question before we move on to Francesca, and the question is this. Talking about that intergenerational conversation, please just put your hand up if you are under 35. You can just go down to your, where it says more, the 3 little, no it does, yeah, 3 little dots. If you press that, you'll see on that list, it'll say reactants. So you can see that my colleague has put a hand up to say they are under 35. So I've got 1, 2, how many more in this room are under 35? So we have got, this is not a balanced representation. 1, 2, 3, 4. 4 people in this room are under 35. So this is not a balanced representation of age equity, but I'm so glad that we do have youth representation and the youth voice is here. So we thank you so much for joining us, those of you who do represent the future. And it's great to have those voices here. We cannot have this conversation without the youth, because if we are not doing this work for the youth, then, or for future generations, then what are we doing it for? So thank you so much, everybody. I really thoroughly enjoyed that section, the breakout rooms. And I would like to now call on SAFCEI's Executive Director, Francesca de Gasparis, to tell us how SAFCEI is uniting women of faith to help solve the climate crisis. Just to introduce you a little bit more fully than I did earlier, SAFCEI, let me start that again. Francesca is the Executive Director of SAFCEI, and previously she was Director of the Green Belt Movement International of Europe. That's GBMI. So Francesca ran GBMI Europe since its inception in 2005, after Wangari Maathai was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize in 2004. And as I mentioned to you before, Francesca worked with Wangari Maathai very closely. So Francesca has a master's degree in environment and community from Antioch University and has worked on environmental issues for about 2 decades now. Her focus has been on advocacy, policy, and climate change strategies within a gender and justice frame. She has worked with numerous NGOs in Africa on sustainable development and a holistic environmental approach, helping to ensure that NGOs have the support they need to deliver their aims. And Francesca, the floor is yours. Welcome. Thank you. It is wonderful to have you with us today.
Thanks so much, Barry, and thank you all. Thank you to my colleagues for this, setting up this wonderful meeting, especially you, Barry, as lead. And so great to see everyone here today and start engaging. Hi, Dudu, and hi, Jessica and Makoma. It's so great to see old friends on here and also making new friends too. As Barry said, I've been given the wonderful job of taking this, what we've heard this morning and what we've heard in the breakout groups into the SAFCEI context. Yeah, and I think Barry mentioned I've been working for SAFCEI. I've been in this role for about 5 years now, just over 5 years. So it's been very interesting for me to take my environmental background into the faith context. In Africa, as you know, I was working with an African NGO, the Green Belt Movement, which is headquartered in Kenya and still exists, although Wangari, unfortunately, is no longer with us, and indeed is one of our ancestors now. So she is now one of the people who's helping guide us in our work, as Makoma is sharing with us. I'd like to just start, if I may, share my screen. I don't have a lot of slides. I just want to share a couple of images for this. Organizers, if you could just let me know when I can share my screen, then I will do so. Okay, great. Does seem to be working. Fantastic. Okay, thank you so much. So I first wanted to start. It's nice that the way that Barry introduced me today was talking about my work with Wangari, because of course she was a very big inspiration for me and for many of us as women living in Africa who are environmentalists. Wangari was in fact the first environmentalist to be recognized by the Nobel Peace Prize Committee because of the link between sustainable development, the environment, and peace, and how that really is about democracy. She used to often talk about the three-legged stool, the African three-legged stool that's carved from one piece of wood, and that real interconnectedness of things. So yes, as you know, SAFCEI is a multi-faith NGO. So the way that we work is through working with all faiths and none. And I was particularly inspired this morning to hear from our speakers. And I just wanted to just quickly touch on what I heard in my lessons from this morning. First of all, with Jessica, I was so inspired by the rich content that you shared, your personal reflections on Indigenous knowledge, climate science, and other information, and your experience of gender in science and the role of faith in guiding us. I was really inspired by what you told us about how you have those 6 ways that your religion inform your work. So thank you so much. And also to Makoma, wow, you know, reminding us of the warriors, the women warriors of Africa, who had the might and power and stood up for the rights of people, fought colonialism, those African spirit guides, of which, as I mentioned, Wangari is one of my personal ones. and how we are all nature and the action that we can take. And also the new crop, the current crop of women leaders who are really helping us, of which Makoma, you indeed, and Jessica both fit that category for me. Just a little bit about me. I don't often share about myself, but I do think it's relevant when we talk about faith. I am a woman of mixed heritage, both Catholic and Jewish faiths in my past, as well as very much coming from science belief systems. I know we don't often talk about science as a belief system, but when we talk about the constructions that we use to understand the world, there are many different layers. And of course, there's different forms of knowledge and different forms of realities. And science is definitely one that has shaped my past through my heritage. My surname, de Gasparis, which you can see on the screen, means of Caspar. And Caspar was the Moorish king who went to visit baby Jesus. So that's my heritage. And the Moorish king, of course, was from Africa. So although, as you can see from my faith basis and also my name, I am from a Dutch and Italian parentage, but originally we're all from Africa, as we've been told. I think, you know, what I really wanted to touch on during this section of the Interfaith Dialogues today, looking at women, is what is SAFCEI and what is it that we are doing? Who are the women of SAFCEI? What is the role of women in climate justice and environmental justice? And what do we see women's opportunity is in this? And we know from both mainstream society and many of the mainstream religions that often we still are facing very patriarchal structures. And what do we mean by that? We mean that often faiths are exclusively headed up by men. And often we see that also in terms of our governments and other leaderships. We often see, especially in Africa, although not exclusively in Africa, I might add, issues of gender are a worldwide issue. You know, different cultures express their biases in different ways. And many times in Africa, I've found women particularly well respected as compared to Northern cultures. So, but we do know that oftentimes in our societies, we see men at the top of the hierarchy. And so, of course, SAFCEI wants to look at gender and faith as something that needs adjustment. You know, SAFCEI is an organization that's involved in social change making. And what do we do when we do social change? What we're trying to do is help encourage society, our faith, the world, to move into a more equal, better equity, a better caring for the environment. And when we talk about climate justice and faith justice, you cannot remove gender justice out of that. And I think it's important to say in terms of our theoretical basis from SAFCEI, so the analysis that we use, the lens that we use when we work with faith communities in Africa, not all faiths have a patriarchal root. That may be the dominant one that we see in a Christian ideology. And perhaps other religions sometimes have that fundamentalist approach. But many faiths, in particular in African indigenous traditional faiths, have a feminine root. That connection to nature that Makoma was reminding us about, and Jessica as well, recognizing the links between our daily lives, our spiritual lives, and the cosmos. The acknowledgement of gender, not just being male and female, but also the third gender, the third way. And that in many traditional cosmologies was closer to God, closer to the spirit world, giving us access to the wisdom of nature and the guides of our ancestors. And Makoma also reminded us how those cycles of nature, the cycles of the moon, the cycles of women, really link us back to life and death. So how women really are, and the Jewish faith often talks about this, women are closer to God than men because of their natural cycle, because of the role that they play in communities, the caring role, the way that they are at the forefront, as we heard in our small breakout group. Women are at the forefront, both of environmental destruction and also receiving the brunt of the climate crisis and when our environment is degraded. So what is the role that women can play? So when I talk about our theoretical lens, we're talking about SAFCEI bringing gender issues centrally into our work, center into our practice, and center into our approach. We look at policies around issues such as environmental and climate justice, and we say, where is gender in this? How does this really result? How does justice result in a more equal society? How does justice care for those who are most vulnerable? We're called to do that both in our faith, but also when we talk about this issue of men and women in society and the roles that they play. So SAFCEI does this through a number of means. Some of them are more subtle than others. Some of them still need work. And that's why I so appreciate to listen to others and to understand what is it that faith communities are facing when they're dealing with environmental crises and other issues in their communities. So first of all, in our training and our targets, we always look for equal gender participation and representation. So we always want to have, in fact, last year, one of our male colleagues, Gabriel, said, no, 40% women participation isn't enough. We need 50-50. And everyone agreed. So we've just given ourselves a bigger target in terms of our spaces. We also have sometimes women-only spaces, recognizing that women may not speak up in spaces that are mixed. So we recognize the differentiated experiences of men and women. And we also seek to balance the experts who speak to us. So we actively avoid the hashtag all-male panels. And some of you may have seen this before, but oftentimes, and I've had the unfortunate experience of having an all-male panel speaking, for example, on gender issues. That's not okay. When we're talking about representation from communities, we do need to see better representation. We do need to see better diversity, and we do need to see genders represented. So that's very important to SAFCEI. You know, when we go into international spaces, we feel that we have a mandate, an opportunity to speak out for women in Africa, sharing what we're hearing and learning from women. This is very important. And I want to go to my second slide, if I may. One of my favorite quotes of Wangari's is about who are African women. Oftentimes, there's a sense that we need to be more, or that there's something that we as women, you know, we often feel that we're always on the learning curve, you know, as women. Somehow the way that women are isn't enough, or it needs to change. It's oftentimes what women experience when they're living in the world, living out their roles. And in particular, when you are a woman leader, oftentimes you'll receive a lot of criticism. And I love this quote from Wangari's, just to keep us feeling strong in ourselves and just to remember the work that we do is so important. That African women need to know that it's okay to be, for them to be the way they are, to see that the way they are is a strength and to be liberated from fear and silence. So really just to encourage each one of us, whether we are women or men, to really celebrate the women in our lives, to uphold them, to tell them that their voice is one that needs to be heard. Even when they're telling us something that we may not particularly like, it's still important to listen to women. And I think that's one of SAFCEI's fundamental approaches with how are we doing this work on gender and with women. So then, of course, also one of the things that's so important is thinking about policy, how it's developing, what's happening in the UNFCCC spaces, what's happening in climate and environmental policy, and what does that mean in reality for practitioners, for faith leaders from the communities across Africa that we're working with. What is it that faith leaders are learning and experiencing, and how does that practice of implementing policy influence the policies? And so just for a very small example, in our breakup group today, the women leaders were speaking about the practical challenges that women are facing in their local communities. And what I loved, and the lesson that I heard today, was that linking the very problem that you face, whether it's a dump, whether it's the fact that you don't have enough, as a rural woman or as someone who's busy trying to feed your family and clothe your children and educate your children and make a good life for them, whatever it is that the problem is that you're faced, to feel that the women and their communities can be encouraged to see the very problems they face as the opportunity to make a difference. The waste that we have, someone mentioned chicken manure, is the thing that can fertilize our gardens and create a beautiful, healthy vegetable for our families to eat. So how do we link the very problems we face with conserving natural resources, managing what we have to make a positive difference for ourselves and our families? And essentially what that was, the lesson for me, was how acting locally, how taking action locally links to climate change, climate resilience, and ultimately the climate impacts that we're experiencing in Africa. So those very small, simple steps are actually most profound. And those who are at the forefront of the problems that we face in Africa, and it's often a rural woman raising her family, are also those who have got the most access to potentially seeing the change that we want to see in society. So yeah, really inspired by what was shared today. And obviously at SAFCEI, we are offering trainings. We often offer forums like this one today, where you get to hear from really inspirational women leaders who are doing profound work, and thus widening our circle of knowledge, widening our circle of influence, and really helping us understand from those perspectives, what is it that women in Africa are facing, and how can we listen to the women? And Barry, I don't know how much longer I have, but I did want to end, and I'm very happy to talk some more if there's more time. But I did want to end with mentioning that we have our AGM coming up in just 2 weeks. It's on the 18th of August, Thursday, 2 weeks. And our keynote speaker is Vandana Shiva. She's an ecofeminist scholar and environmentalist. And Vandana also comes from her spiritual tradition and will be talking to us about the challenges of industrial agriculture in Africa and lessons from the experience in India, where she's been leading the movement for many years. Vandana really is, she was one of Wangari's colleagues and one of the women leaders in the world that I was very privileged to meet through Wangari, through her sphere of influence. And I think you would all be, if you're not coming to our AGM, I really want to encourage you to join us, because it's going to be a wonderful presentation from Vandana, specifically talking about the challenges that we're facing in Africa. So thank you so much. Barry, I'm going to hand back to you. I don't know which one of the many Barrys on the group is you. Ah, there you are.
Bye. Bye.
Would you like me to cover anything else, Barry? And I'm not sure how much more time we have. I'm very happy to take questions or just open it up to general discussion.
Well, thank you, Francesca, because that's exactly what I'd really like to do, is open it up to general questions and discussion right now. What a wonderful presentation, as always. Thank you so much. And I know how busy you are too. So really thrilled that you were able to make the time to be here today. And I do know that you always like to be here. So I also want to, just as we open up to discussion, I would like to just throw a little question in to all of our speakers. And it's this: I think about women as holding space in a much more profound way than often they are aware of. So I think about, for instance, the role that we have almost of holding the emotions of the planet. And I know that climate grief is a very big thing right now that many of us are feeling, that we are subject to, especially those of us who are immersed in eco-justice and environmental care. So I wonder how you manage this added pressure, the sadness at species loss, at biodiversity loss, at the tremendous pressure that the world is under right now, and the many doomsday predictions, and all the fight really to the warriorship of the lives that we lead. How do you manage that? Francesca, perhaps you'd like to go first, seeing as your face is in front of me.
Thanks, Barry. Yeah, I think really taking time to grieve is so important. I know that it's not easy. You know, I feel like sharing another Wangari quote with you. She always helped me. One of her other quotes was, "You will get knocked down many times in life, many times, each and every one of us, whether we're a woman or a man, that's life. But we must always, you know, take a deep breath, stand up again, dust ourselves off and say, I will persist, I will rise again." You know, I think it is very hard to do this work and to continuously feel motivated and inspired and not feel, you know, all the other emotions as well. And I think we must take time to acknowledge how we feel, support each other, allow each other to stumble. We all stumble, allow the stumble, but also to be willing to say, you know, I'm going to rise again. So I think that's really what it is. And, you know, that's very much of our Christian faith. Jesus did say that we must rise up and walk. And I think that's a very important thing always to remember is, what does our faith tell us in these dark times? And faith is often a very deep guide. Our ancestors are often very deep guides. The trials and tribulations that everyone faces in life is humbling. And so then we just must try again with each other and remember each other's humanity. Thank you, Barry.
Yeah, absolutely. Beautifully put, Francesca, as always. Thank you so much. Jessica, would you like to add any thoughts to coping mechanisms for being in this industry?
Well, I would echo what Francesca said around having a supportive community. I think having space where you're cared for by the people around you, I think is really important, so that you have the strength and external, I don't know, and verification, I suppose, or just having the, a community that's kind of encouraging you along the way. I guess you have to be optimistic. I think it's a choice to be optimistic. And it's about, you know, I think there's a lot of optimism that we're seeing at the moment, even if we're not going in the right direction fast enough. And even if there's still more investments in fossil fuels and there's massive degradation of environments and huge biodiversity loss, we have to recognize that the conversation is going in the right direction. There's more awareness and there are more policy frameworks. So maybe it won't be fast enough, but at least the consciousness of the earth is changing, and at least there's more opportunity for collaboration and cooperation. So I find hope in that, and I also find hope in just finding time to be in nature and getting recharged from it.
Beautiful, thank you. Really beautifully put. Makoma, would you like to add to that conversation?
Yes, thank you very much. What I like is that I think my first response is what's so common. Being grounded is very important. I grew up in what I would call kind of a matriarchal setup, where I was living with my granny, was raised by my granny, but I had my aunts, I had my mom, I had my sisters around. So that's what I call a super support system home. But that was from home, but that extended also to the community, to the neighborhoods where we lived. So that grounding of being able to go home, of being able to practice with the family, whatever ritual you have, that's what is important, that keeps you going, because that's what gives you strength. But the most important thing is that you who you are. Do not pretend to be someone else. And I know that that is something that people don't understand when you becoming yourself. I know a lot of people can share stories and they would label you as arrogant, as being insensitive or not understanding or not progressive, but that's not that. What is important is that you become yourself. I'm not, and I would also advise that people don't do things that are not comfortable with. Anything I'm comfortable with, I'll go for it, but if I'm not, I would not. And so I am myself always, and I don't pretend to be somebody else because I'm not going to manage to be somebody else. It's better to be myself. The other thing that really keeps us going, which is important, it's your passion. If you believe in something, you become consistent. And you know that you're not perfect. There's so many uphills, there's so many disappointments. Sometimes things don't go the way you want them to go, or you envisage them to go, and there's a lot of disappointment, but learn to accept any outcome before it's presented to you. And I think that's what makes things much better, in the sense that when you accept the possibilities that things may go to the wrong side or to the right side, so whichever way they go, you'd be able to evaluate, but consistently say, this is other lessons, and this, I think, would be able to carry you forward. With me, I swear by my passion, I swear by my grounding and the consistency of following up on what I had started. Thank you.
Wow, such a beautiful message. All three beautiful messages of hope, Makoma. Thank you so much. That was really well put, and that's just given me a lift for the rest of the day and the rest of the week as well. Are there any other questions before we close? It is 5 to 12. I see Halumba, your hand is up.
Yes, and thank you very much. Are you getting me?
We're getting you. Yes, thank you.
Right. Thank you very much for the presentations from the panelists, and also I think the responses to the questions that they've just given. There's a situation that I needed maybe their comment. In our group, there is a discussion that we did not finish because our group was really discussing other things, and we went into detail to discuss in a situation that we agreed that there was need to advocate for policy change, for system change, to give space for women to really be able to take up leadership challenges and leadership positions. Now, the other aspect also that we discovered is that we're discussing is that in a situation where you have provided this environment and a very good situation and the conditions for these ladies to participate, to take up leadership roles. Now, what happens if they begin to also to suppress other women as they take up these leadership roles? How do we mitigate such a challenge so that they don't act as a bad example to the other women who will now begin to fear to take up leadership challenges? I don't know if my question is really clear.
I think I understand your question, Halumba. Thank you for that question. And that is really, how do we prevent women from, I think, really buying into power play and using their positions of leadership to, I don't know what the right word is, to make life more difficult for other women. So perhaps, I don't know if anybody would like to respond to that question.
Here comes
okay.
Makoma, yes, please go ahead, Makoma, and we'll take Francesca after you.
Okay, I think what the question is, we have heard that so many times, and what we've, in my experience, let me say so, that this is something that when you are in organizations, this is what you would be, people would say that women are against each other, rather supporting each other. They're not bringing up each other. But that's not the case. Because we are in patriarchal societies, and this is the notion that men, particularly because they misinterpret, they misrepresent, and they want to keep their positions. So most of the time we find that it's men who are fueling this by belittling women, by saying women are unable to do a whole lot of things. But in real life situation, you find that there's a motive behind that. Women are in nature supportive of each other, and it's because of the patriarchal kind of situation that we find ourselves in that is influencing everything we do, that you find that such practices are being perpetuated by men using women to do that. Thanks.
Thank you, Makoma. Very, very good point indeed. Francesca, you had something that you would like to contribute?
Yeah, I want to support what Makoma just said. I think oftentimes when we start talking about the differences in gender in society, we get that response, yes, but what happens if this happens? Or yes, but what about that one woman who did perpetrate violence against men? And I think what we need to look at is, what we're talking about is principles of change. What we're talking about is wanting to bring about a change in society. You will always be able to find an exception for an argument. And it really doesn't mean that we shouldn't strive. We shouldn't strive for that change. And we shouldn't, that just because you may find a woman who isn't displaying good leadership attributes, that then women shouldn't take up that role. So when we talk about this, let's talk about it in the conceptual way that we're talking about things, the need to see change in society. When I mentioned the word patriarchy, only one example of patriarchy is that men are in leadership. Another example of patriarchy is exactly what Makoma was talking about. It's about a social construct, about the roles of men and women, about what it means to be a woman, about can women be strong and have a strong voice, or would that be an aggressive, bossy woman? What is the role that women are allowed to have in leadership? And how can we challenge ourselves to think about it differently, even to hear women's voices differently? How can we say, now if Francesca was a man, how would I hear what Francesca is saying right now? That's the challenge that we must ask ourselves. That's the way that we can really embrace women as leaders, challenge ourselves. And if someone is displaying really poor leadership, well, of course, then they must be held to account, whether they're a man or woman, or whether they identify differently. Every person must hold to the same qualities that we want to see in leadership. So I think these things are nuanced and important discussions, but I think we cannot use one example as a reason why women shouldn't move into leadership. So I think that's very important for us to always remember. Thank you.
Thank you, Francesca. Jessica, do you have anything you'd like to add before we close? I see that we are on time, but we will give you a moment.
I would simply say that I think that even if it's men and women, I mean, I think Francesca would really close well on her point. But to add to that, I guess my only point would be that we all are subject to the same societal norms, and just because we are females, it doesn't mean we don't subscribe to the same patterns that reinforce gender inequality. So it is important for, even if you go into a female role, you need to acknowledge that there are still attributes that are modeled in most institutional structures that encourage what is typically associated with dominant male features in leadership. And perhaps we, as both men and women, need to think about what those are and create a more supportive environment that we don't encourage competition, but we encourage collaboration.
I could not end better myself. That was perfect. Thank you so much. I'm actually going to close it there, even though I think this conversation could go on so much longer. It's been an amazing, amazing time. I am going to ask one woman to close for us in prayer, and that is Tendai Gurupira from Zimbabwe. Tendai, would you like to just bring us your closing prayer? And before we do that, just to say a huge thank you once again to Jessica, Francesca, Makoma, and of course to all of you for participating and for bringing your wonderful energy to this engagement. And thank you particularly to all the men who've been here and who have been open to listening and to participating and engaging in this conversation. When we start to teach our little girls that leadership is their birthright as well as our boys, then we will really know that we are getting somewhere. So thank you again so much, everybody. Blessings to your day and every strength to your path. Tendai.
Thank you, Reverend Barry. Let us pray. Father God, we come to you this afternoon. We want to thank you for making us women leaders and faith leaders. We want to thank you for your word that you have made us in your own image. We want to thank you, Lord, that you also gave us responsibility to look after our environment. Help us, my God, my Lord, as women leaders, as we go in our communities, in our families, in our churches, and in our countries, to go and give this awareness on climate change. We have got a role to play. We cannot do this alone. That's why we are saying to you, God, help us, Lord. We want to thank you for this organization, the SAFCEI, which is also recognizing us women, that we have got an equal role to play as men, and we can as well work in collaboration to give this awareness on climate change. Help us, Lord, as we continue soldiering on giving awareness on climate change. We want to pray for our organization. We want to pray for other women leaders. We want to pray for men, so that we do this thing together. And in the end, we will achieve our goals. In the name of the Father, the Holy Spirit, and the Holy Ghost. Amen.
Amen. Tendai,
Thank
so
you
much.
for a nice program.
Blessings, and thank you too. Thank you, everybody. Go well.
Okay. God bless you.
Very, thank you all.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone. Thanks for such an informative webinar.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Sabili. So glad you were here.